but only after consuming dangerous herbal remedies that could cause permanent damage or death. The pressure to perform was so intense that men would risk poisoning themselves rather than face the social destruction of a failed trial. The performance pressure of these trials cannot be overstated. Multiple attempts were technically allowed, but each failure exponentially destroyed your reputation. Witnesses included not just legal officials but medical experts who would conduct examinations, notaries who recorded every detail, and often the spouse's family members who had a financial stake in the outcome. The certified inspectors had specific assessment techniques documented in medical texts. Some involved various stimulation methods, others used temperature variations, and some employed primitive devices that would be considered medical equipment today. The psychological torture was arguably worse than the physical examination. Imagine trying to demonstrate fitness while standing in a courthouse, surrounded by strangers documenting your every physical response, knowing that failure meant complete social and economic ruin. Some men reportedly fainted from anxiety, others wept openly. The court records preserve their humiliation in excruciating detail for posterity. Here's what most people don't realize about the context of these trials. Marriage in medieval times was fundamentally an economic contract, and consummation was required to make it legally binding. The Church's theological position held that procreation was the primary purpose of marriage. A marriage without the possibility of children was considered invalid. Canon law, inherited from Roman legal traditions, specifically allowed for annulment in cases of permanent incapacity. Medieval medical understanding saw intimate dysfunction as either a disease requiring treatment or a curse requiring spiritual intervention. Physicians believed in complex humor theories where imbalances could prevent normal function. Women actually had legal rights to marital satisfaction, something that might surprise modern audiences. The Church taught that both partners had obligations to fulfill when requested. A person who couldn't perform was literally failing their legal duties. Statistical evidence from court records suggests there were over 200 fitness trials per decade in major cities like London, Paris, and Florence. The success rate for maintaining marriages after being accused was less than 30%. The social consequences extended beyond the immediate couple. Entire family alliances could crumble, dowries would be returned, and business partnerships dissolved. This makes modern relationship counseling seem like an absolute blessing. Today, we take medical privacy for granted. Your intimate performance is between you, your partner, and maybe your doctor. Nobody's conducting examinations in a courtroom. No committee of inspectors is manually evaluating you while scribes take notes. The medications, devices, and procedures available today would have seemed like magic to medieval people facing these trials. We've completely forgotten that intimate privacy is a relatively modern invention. But here's the truly disturbing part. At least fitness trials were for married couples trying to resolve a legal dispute. Imagine if your wedding night itself was a public performance requiring witnesses to verify success. If you thought fitness trials were invasive, wait until you hear about ceremonial verification, where consummating marriage required an audience of nobles. In 1445, Margaret of Anjou married King Henry VI of England. She was 15 years old. On her wedding night, 23 nobles, clergy members, and court officials crowded into the royal bedchamber to witness the consummation. They weren't just present in the building or waiting outside. They were in the actual room, positioned around the curtained bed, listening for sounds and watching for movement that would indicate successful union. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood at the foot of the bed, blessing the union while the young couple attempted intimacy for the first time. Without this witnessed consummation, the marriage that united England and France would be considered invalid. Imagine your parents, priest, and employer watching you on the most nervous night of your life. That was a royal wedding in medieval Europe. The ceremonial preparation process was a horror show of public humiliation disguised as celebration. First came the undressing ritual. The bride and groom would be disrobed by their respective relatives, while wedding guests sang songs and made crude jokes. Every item of clothing removed was accompanied by cheers and inappropriate comments. The bride's mother and aunts would remove her dress, commenting on her body's readiness for childbearing. The groom's male relatives would undress him while making jokes about his capabilities and offering last-minute advice on technique. Then came the procession to the bedchamber. The couple would be led through corridors filled with drunk wedding guests who would throw things at them, supposedly for fertility but often just for humiliation. They'd be forced to drink blessed wine mixed with allegedly enhancement herbs. They'd eat special foods like oysters and honey cakes, all while enduring constant commentary from the crowd. The priest would then bless the bed itself, sprinkling holy water on the sheets where consummation would occur. Special prayers would be said for fertility, for the woman to conceive quickly, and for the man to perform adequately. The curtains around the bed would be drawn, but they were often thin enough to see shadows and movement. Witnesses would position themselves strategically around the room, some near the bed to hear sounds, others by the door to prevent anyone from leaving before completion. The royal examples are the most well-documented and horrifying. When Catherine of Aragon married Prince Arthur in 1501, 6 high-ranking nobles were required to witness the consummation. The Spanish ambassador insisted on being present to ensure the alliance between England and Spain was properly sealed. When Arthur emerged from the bedchamber the next morning, he famously declared he had been in Spain and demanded ale because marriage is thirsty work. Whether he actually consummated the marriage became a matter of international dispute decades later during Henry VIII's annulment proceedings. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's wedding night in 1770 was even worse. The Archbishop of Reims stood in the bedroom, along with various French nobles, while the teenage couple fumbled through their first intimate experience. Court records indicate it took 7 years before they successfully consummated the marriage. 7 years of repeated public attempts with witnesses present. The psychological damage of such public pressure on intimate performance is unimaginable. When Margaret Tudor married the King of Scotland at age 13, Scottish nobles literally insisted on watching to ensure the English princess was properly claimed for Scotland. Witnesses reported hearing her distress, whether from pain, fear, or the horror of public consumption we'll never know. The political nature of these marriages meant that every moment was a matter of state importance. The verification methods went beyond just witnessing the act itself. The next morning brought fresh humiliations. The sheets would be displayed publicly, hung from windows or paraded through the castle. The bride would be examined by midwives, who would check for physical signs of consummation. They would then swear legal oaths about what they found. These testimonies were recorded in official documents that survive to this day. Witnesses would provide detailed testimony about what they heard and saw. Movement of the bed curtains consistent with vigorous activity appears in multiple historical accounts. Sounds indicating completion of the marital act was considered ideal evidence. Some witnesses were required to stay all night to ensure multiple attempts at consummation. If the couple failed to produce adequate evidence of success, they might be forced to try again the next night with even more witnesses present. Failed consummations led to immediate annulment proceedings. The political and economic consequences were catastrophic. Alliances between nations could crumble. Dowries would be disputed. Succession crises could trigger wars. The pressure on young, inexperienced couples to perform intimately in front of audiences was inhuman. Here's what most people don't realize about why this insanity was considered necessary. Political marriages were the foundation of medieval diplomacy. A marriage alliance between royal families could prevent wars, secure trade routes, and ensure peaceful succession. But an unconsummated marriage was legally void. It didn't count. Inheritance law demanded absolute proof that marriages were real and consummated. The virginity of noble brides was considered a valuable political asset that needed to be publicly transferred to ensure legitimacy. The church's position made things worse. Marriage was a sacrament, but it wasn't complete until physical consummation. The theology was specific. The two becoming one flesh required actual union. Witnesses were necessary to prevent future disputes about legitimacy. A king needed to know his heir was actually his. A noble family needed to ensure their daughter was properly married before releasing her dowry. Community investment in noble fertility was intense. The entire social structure depended on legitimate heirs. Witness testimony could prevent succession wars. The practice varied by region. French ceremonies tended to involve more witnesses. English ones focused on mourning verification. Italian ceremonies sometimes involved the entire wedding party crowding into the bedchamber. This makes modern awkward wedding speeches seem absolutely delightful. Today, the most embarrassing part of a wedding might be a drunk relative's toast. We've privatized intimacy to such a degree that even mentioning it at a wedding is considered crude. The idea of witnesses to consummation is so foreign to modern sensibilities that it sounds like fiction. Privacy in intimate matters is such a given that we can't imagine a world where your intimate performance was a public spectacle. The truly disturbing part is that we think of privacy as a fundamental human right, but it's actually a modern invention that didn't fully develop until after 1700. For most of human history, intimacy was a community affair with social, economic, and political implications that required public verification. Speaking of the church's involvement in intimate matters, wait until you hear about the bishops who literally owned entertainment establishments. Here's where medieval society gets truly insane. The same bishops preaching moral purity owned thousand-worker entertainment operations. The Bishop of Winchester didn't just tolerate adult entertainment, he ran the largest such empire in medieval England. 18 separate establishments in Southwark, just across the Thames from London, employed over 1,000 women known as Winchester geese. These weren't hidden operations. They had official signs, published price lists, and the bishop's coat of arms displayed prominently above the doors. The profits from these establishments funded the construction and maintenance of Winchester Cathedral. Every prayer uttered in that holy space, every hymn sung to God's glory, was literally paid for by the entertainment industry. The hypocrisy is so staggering, it defies modern comprehension. The Winchester operation was a sophisticated business empire. The establishments weren't random houses. They were purpose-built facilities located in Southwark's Liberty of the Clink, an area under the bishop's direct jurisdiction. The buildings had distinctive architecture with large windows facing the street where women would display themselves. The famous Boar's Head establishment could accommodate over 100 customers per night. The Cardinal's Hat specialized in higher-class clientele, charging premium rates for clean women certified disease, free by the bishop's physicians. The bishop's officials maintained detailed records that survived in church archives. Weekly profit reports showed earnings of £20 to £40 per establishment, equivalent to hundreds of thousands in modern currency. The licensing system was remarkably bureaucratic. Women needed official permits renewed annually for a fee. They paid weekly sin taxes directly to the church coffers. Special fees were charged for working on holy days, though adult entertainment was technically banned during Lent, a ban widely ignored with payment of additional fines. The recruitment system was especially disturbing. The annual goose fair was ostensibly a hiring fair for domestic servants, but everyone knew its real purpose. Young women from the countryside would arrive seeking work, only to find the best-paying positions were in the bishop's establishments. Church officials would assess women for attractiveness and health, directing the most appealing to the premium facilities. The Bishop of Winchester's business model became the template for ecclesiastical entertainment across Europe. Each transaction was taxed, with the church taking typically 30 to 40% of gross revenues. The bishop's physicians would conduct weekly medical inspections, checking for visible signs of disease. Women who passed received official stamps of approval. Those who failed were banned from working until cleared, though they could pay bribes to continue operating. Protection services were another revenue stream. The bishop's guards would patrol the entertainment districts, preventing violence against the women, for a fee. They also ensured customers paid their bills, acting as medieval collection agents. Women could purchase retirement funds, essentially insurance policies that would provide for them when they could no longer work. Of course, few lived long enough to collect. The Winchester operation wasn't unique. It was just the best documented. In Avignon, the papal entertainment complex operated directly under Vatican control during the Avignon papacy. The Pope's treasurers collected taxes that funded papal armies. The building still stands today, its papal coat of arms carved in stone above the entrance. Church records show it employed over 200 women at its peak, with special rooms reserved for visiting church dignitaries. German bishop establishments formed virtual chains across the Holy Roman Empire. The Archbishop of Mainz controlled similar operations in 6 different cities. The Bishop of Strasbourg owned 4 establishments within sight of his cathedral. These weren't secret operations. They advertised openly, competed for customers, and paid their taxes directly to church treasuries. Spanish cathedral operations were often built into the cathedral complex itself. In Seville, the cathedral's entertainment facility occupied a building connected to the church by underground tunnels. Priests could visit without being seen in public. The women were required to attend special masses, sitting in designated areas while being preached to about the activities they'd engage in later that evening. Multiple church councils attempted reform, but the economic reality made change impossible. The Council of Constance in 1414 tried to ban clerical ownership of entertainment establishments. The attending bishops arrived with an entourage of 700 women from the industry. The reform motion failed. The Council of Basel in 1431 issued stern condemnations of clerical involvement in adult entertainment. The condemning documents were written in rooms above the city's largest such establishment, owned by the local bishop. The theological justification for this blatant hypocrisy reveals the twisted logic of medieval Christianity. Church fathers cited Augustine's doctrine of such activities as a necessary evil, like sewers, unpleasant but required for a functioning city. Thomas Aquinas argued that these services prevented worse behaviors like assault, adultery, and other offenses. By controlling and regulating such activities, bishops claimed they were actually protecting public morality. The economic reality was simpler. The church needed money. Cathedrals were expensive. Bishops lived like princes. Wars required funding. Entertainment taxes were reliable income streams. Some historians estimate that such revenues provided 20 to 30% of church income in major cities. The Bishop of Winchester's entertainment empire alone generated enough annual revenue to build a new church every year. The profit margins were staggering. A typical transaction might cost the customer 4 pence. The woman would keep 1 penny, the establishment would take 1 penny for overhead, and 2 pence would go directly to church coffers. Multiply this by thousands of transactions per week across hundreds of church-owned establishments, and you understand why reform was impossible. The medieval church was literally addicted to entertainment revenue. But here's what most people don't realize. This wasn't seen as particularly scandalous at the time. The separation between religious authority and economic activity that we take for granted didn't exist. Bishops were major landowners, tax collectors, and business operators. Owning entertainment establishments was just another revenue stream, like collecting mill taxes or road tolls. The same bishop who preached against immorality on Sunday would review his establishment profits on Monday without any sense of contradiction. The social control aspect was equally important. By controlling such activities, the church controlled society itself. They decided who could sell services, where, when, and for how much. They created categories of honest versus dishonest providers. They enforced dress codes that marked workers as separate from respectable women. The establishments became tools of social engineering, channeling male desires into regulated, taxable channels. This makes modern church scandals look absolutely quaint by comparison. Today's religious leaders caught in inappropriate situations at least try to hide their activities. Medieval bishops put their coat of arms on establishment doors. They didn't just tolerate adult entertainment, they industrialized it, regulated it, and profited from it on a massive scale. The hypocrisy wasn't hidden. It was institutionalized at the highest levels of religious authority. But the church's intimate contradictions went deeper. They literally prescribed satisfaction as medical treatment. Medieval doctors literally prescribed physical satisfaction as medical necessity for conception. According to medieval medical theory, your great-great-grandmother couldn't get pregnant without experiencing satisfaction. This wasn't some fringe belief. It was accepted medical fact taught in universities and written in medical textbooks. The two-seed theory held that conception required contributions from both partners, and women only released their contribution during peak experience. If a woman couldn't reach satisfaction, she couldn't conceive. This meant husbands were medically required to master intimate techniques, physicians taught detailed stimulation methods, and midwives provided hands-on instruction to struggling couples. Medieval doctors were literally prescribing satisfaction centuries before anyone understood anatomy properly. The medical theory came from ancient Greek physician Galen, whose ideas dominated medieval medicine. He taught that women had internal reproductive organs that produced female contribution to conception. Just as men released their contribution through satisfaction, women needed to reach peak experience to release theirs. The medieval medical establishment took this further, creating elaborate theories about the nature of female response. Hot-natured women needed different techniques than cold-natured ones. Moist-humid women required different positions than dry-humid ones. The complexity rivaled modern intimate instruction, but with absolutely no basis in actual anatomy. Medical texts provided exhaustively detailed instructions. The most popular was the Trotula, a compilation of women's medicine that included specific techniques for achieving female satisfaction. Physicians recommended gentle stimulation with sweet-smelling oils and careful attention to sensitive areas. They described optimal positions: woman on top for cold constitutions, sideways for tilted anatomy, alternative positions for women with excessive moisture. The clinical precision is startling from an era we assume knew nothing about female response. Physicians developed tools and techniques that would make modern therapists blush. They prescribed specially designed warming devices, essentially medieval stimulation aids made from polished wood or ivory. Herbal preparations containing mint, pennyroyal, and other heating herbs were applied before intimacy to increase sensitivity. Massage oils with cinnamon and pepper were used to increase blood flow. Some physicians recommended musical accompaniment, believing certain rhythms encouraged female arousal. The practical applications of this theory created a bizarre medical specialty. Midwives became intimate coaches, teaching couples bedroom techniques with startling frankness. They used illustrated manuscripts showing positions designed to maximize female pleasure. They demonstrated manual techniques on cloth models. Some even provided supervised practice sessions where they would coach couples through intimacy, offering real-time advice on rhythm, pressure, and positioning. Herbal enhancement aids for women became a major medical market. Recipes included ground pearls mixed with wine, powdered exotic ingredients in honey, and tinctures of mandrake root. Wealthy women paid fortunes for conception aids that were essentially medieval enhancement devices, carved jade items for exercises, pearl-studded accessories for stimulation, and even primitive irrigation devices filled with stimulating herbs. The medical establishment endorsed all of this as necessary for reproductive health. Case studies from medical texts reveal the clinical approach to female intimate dysfunction. One physician described treating a merchant's wife who had failed to conceive after 3 years of marriage. His prescription included daily intimate massage with heated oils, consumption of warming foods like ginger and cinnamon, and instruction for her husband in proper techniques to encourage female delight. After 2 months of treatment, she conceived. The satisfaction was credited with the success. Medical tools for diagnosing and treating female intimate dysfunction were surprisingly sophisticated. Physicians used examination instruments to check internal anatomy, though their understanding was flawed. They developed arousal tests, using feathers and heated probes to check sensitivity. Some even created primitive feedback devices, hollow tubes placed externally to amplify sounds that would indicate arousal. The medicalization of female pleasure was complete. The Church's position on all this created mind-bending contradictions. Pleasure for its own sake was sinful, but pleasure for procreation was mandatory. Confessors had to thread an impossible needle, condemning women who enjoyed intimacy too much while also condemning those who didn't enjoy it enough to conceive. Theological debates raged about whether experiencing pleasure during conception made the resulting child more sinful. Some argued that children conceived through female satisfaction would be more lustful. Others claimed the opposite, that joyless conception created defective offspring. Confessional manuals reveal the impossible position this put women in. They were supposed to confess enjoying intimacy as a sin, but not enjoying it enough to reach satisfaction was also problematic. One manual advised priests to ask women whether they responded appropriately to their husband's efforts, and whether they felt the release necessary for conception. Women who admitted to faking satisfaction to end unwanted intimacy were told they were preventing God's plan for procreation. The contradictions between medical advice and religious doctrine created a shadow economy of intimate knowledge. Midwives would privately teach what priests publicly condemned. Medical texts circulated in convents where nuns provided reproductive health care. Women shared conception secrets that were essentially satisfaction techniques disguised as fertility treatments. The official culture condemned female pleasure, while the medical establishment required it. Here's what most people don't realize about the context of these practices. Medieval medicine wasn't purely theoretical. It was based on thousands of years of accumulated observation, just interpreted through flawed frameworks. Women's medical practitioners had noticed correlations between intimate satisfaction and fertility. They just explained it through humoral theory rather than hormones. The economic pressure for heirs drove this medical focus on female pleasure. Noble families needed legitimate children to continue bloodlines. Merchant families needed heirs for business continuity. Even peasant families needed children for farm labor. Infertility was an economic disaster. If medical theory said female satisfaction was necessary for conception, then female satisfaction became a medical priority, regardless of religious objections. The gendering of medical knowledge also played a role. Male physicians wrote the theories, but female practitioners provided the actual care. These women had generations of practical knowledge about female anatomy and response that they encoded in medical language to make it acceptable. Teaching a woman to achieve satisfaction was sinful. Providing warming treatments to encourage conception was medical care. This makes medieval doctors seem more progressive than physicians in the 1950s. Victorian doctors would later deny that respectable women experienced intimate pleasure at all. Early 20th century medicine pathologized female satisfaction as hysteria. Medieval physicians, for all their flawed understanding, at least acknowledged female intimate response as medically important. They just wrapped it in theological justifications and humoral theory. The practical impact on medieval women's lives was profound. Unlike later eras where female desire was completely denied, medieval women had medical authorization to demand intimate satisfaction. Court records show women citing lack of satisfaction as grounds for annulment. Medical texts advised husbands that failing to pleasure their wives was failing in their marriage duties. The two-seed theory, however scientifically wrong, created space for female intimate agency. Speaking of conception, wait until you hear the insane things medieval women did to prevent pregnancy. If prescribed satisfaction sounds progressive, medieval contraception will make you grateful for modern medicine. Women literally risked death with every prevention attempt. The ingredient list reads like a dangerous recipe for disaster. Exotic animal substances, heavy metals, toxic plants, and various organic materials. These weren't folk remedies whispered between peasants. They appeared in medical texts written by university-trained physicians. Women would insert dangerous pessaries into their bodies before intimacy. They drank potions containing mercury that could cause organ failure. They used lead-based solutions that caused permanent nerve damage. Every attempt to prevent pregnancy could end their lives, but the alternative, another dangerous childbirth, or another mouth to feed, seemed worse. The barrier methods revealed desperate ingenuity mixed with dangerous ignorance. Crocodile dung wasn't randomly chosen. Its alkaline nature actually does have some contraceptive properties. Egyptian medical texts from 1850 BCE recommended it, and medieval physicians copied ancient wisdom without understanding why it sometimes worked. The problem was sourcing. Most European women used any animal waste available, telling themselves it was the exotic variety. Horse, cow, and pig waste became substitutes, introducing dangerous bacteria. Honey and plant gum combinations were slightly less lethal. Acacia ferments into acid, which has contraceptive properties. Mixed with honey's antibacterial qualities, it created a barrier that had some effectiveness. Women would soak wool or lint in this mixture, forming primitive barriers. The main danger was infection from non-sterile materials and the difficulty of removal. Medical texts describe women dying from toxic shock when improvised barriers became lodged internally. Sea sponges soaked in various substances were the most sophisticated barrier method. Women would use vinegar, lemon juice, or wine as the soaking solution. The acidity could prevent conception, and the sponge created a physical barrier. Mediterranean women had access to natural sea sponges, while Northern European women used whatever absorbent materials they could find: moss, rags, even bread. The practice required careful timing and removal, with infection being a constant risk. Animal membrane barriers represent the closest thing to modern protection. Sheep intestines, fish bladders, and pig bladders were cleaned, stretched, and sometimes sewn into sheaths. These were expensive, reusable, and primarily available to the wealthy. They were tied on with ribbons and had to be soaked in warm milk or water before use. The Catholic Church condemned them absolutely, calling them armor against God's will. Users faced excommunication if discovered. The toxic interventions women subjected themselves to reveal the desperation of unwanted pregnancy. Mercury-based potions were known to prevent pregnancy by slowly poisoning the woman. Physicians prescribed small doses, claiming they cooled the womb. Women experiencing mercury poisoning suffered tremors, tooth loss, and madness. But it did prevent pregnancy, either through toxicity or because dying women don't conceive. Lead salts were equally horrific. Women would drink solutions containing lead compounds, known as sweet salt, for their taste. Others used lead-based vaginal applications. The resulting lead poisoning caused severe abdominal pain, constipation, and eventually brain damage. Skeleton analysis from medieval cemeteries shows young women with lethal levels of lead concentration, likely from contraceptive use. Copper sulfate applications were recommended by Arab medical texts translated into Latin. Women would irrigate internally with copper solutions after intimacy. While copper does have contraceptive properties, the concentrations used caused severe chemical burns. Medical texts describe women suffering permanent scarring and infection from these treatments. The herbal cocktails were marginally safer but still potentially lethal. Pennyroyal tea could prevent implantation but also caused liver failure. Rue, Queen Anne's lace, and tansy were commonly used but required precise dosing. Too little was ineffective. Too much was fatal. Women shared recipes like 7 seeds of Queen Anne's lace chewed daily, or rue tea drunk during menstruation. The margin between contraceptive and poison was razor thin. The magical methods seem absurd, but were taken seriously by desperate women. Weasel reproductive organ amulets were worn around the thigh during intimacy. The organs had to be harvested during specific moon phases and preserved in honey. Mule earwax mixed with honey was applied internally. Mules, being sterile, made their earwax contraceptive by sympathetic magic. Dead infant hands, preferably from unbaptized babies, were worn as amulets. The black market in infant corpses for contraceptive magic was documented in several witch trials. Menstrual blood rituals occupied a strange space between magic and proto-science. Women would save their menstrual blood, dry it, powder it, and secretly feed it to their husbands in wine or food. The theory was that consuming female essence would reduce male potency. Some women burned their used menstrual rags and used the ashes as vaginal pessaries. Others believed that intimacy during menstruation would prevent future pregnancies, a practice condemned by the Church as especially sinful. Exotic animal organ suppositories required fresh organs from black cats killed during specific astrological conditions. The organs would be dried, ground, mixed with herbs, and formed into pessaries. The association of cats with witchcraft made this particularly dangerous. Possession of cat-based contraceptives could trigger accusations of sorcery. Yet, archaeological evidence from medieval latrines shows cat bones in unusual concentrations near convents and establishments, suggesting widespread use. The desperation driving these dangerous choices stemmed from medieval women's impossible situations. Repeated pregnancies destroyed women's bodies. The average woman who survived to menopause had experienced 8 to 12 pregnancies. Childbirth was the leading cause of death for young women. Poor families couldn't feed additional children, yet the Church condemned all contraception as interference with divine will, and husbands had legal rights to intimate access. The knowledge networks that preserved and transmitted contraceptive information were entirely female. Midwives passed recipes to apprentices. Wise women sold herbs and instructions. Workers in the entertainment industry shared professional knowledge. Convents, ironically, became centers of contraceptive expertise. Nuns who provided medical care needed to know what desperate women might have tried. This underground economy of reproductive knowledge operated despite severe legal and religious prohibition. Male refusal to practice withdrawal created much of the contraceptive burden. While withdrawal was also condemned by the Church, it at least didn't risk poisoning. But men who refused this simple method forced women into increasingly dangerous alternatives. Court records show women begging husbands to spill seed outside and being beaten for the suggestion. The gender dynamics of contraceptive responsibility haven't changed as much as we might hope. Midwife networks operated sophisticated supply chains for contraceptive materials. They imported exotic substances from distant lands, collected specific herbs during optimal seasons, and maintained recipes that balanced effectiveness with survivability. The prosecution of midwives as witches often centered on their contraceptive knowledge. Knowing how to prevent life was seen as adjacent to knowing how to end it. This makes modern birth control look like candy in comparison. Modern contraception is safe, effective, and legal. We've forgotten that for most of history, preventing pregnancy meant risking death. Every act of family planning was potentially fatal. Women played Russian roulette with their lives every time they tried to control their fertility. The fact that women survived these methods long enough to pass on the knowledge is a testament to human desperation and resilience. But preventing pregnancy was nothing compared to the corpse ingredients in medieval love potions. Forget flowers and chocolate. Medieval romance required corpse parts, bodily fluids, and the bone marrow of dead children. In 1320, Beatrice de Planisol stood trial in France for feeding her menstrual blood to her lover mixed in wine. She wasn't some isolated madwoman. She was following established recipes from grimoires that circulated among desperate women. The shopping list for medieval love potions reads like evidence from a serial killer's basement: ground bones from unbaptized infants, organs from recently executed criminals, bodily fluids harvested during intimacy, brain tissue from doves, and powdered human heart. These weren't metaphorical ingredients or poetic exaggerations. Women literally robbed graves, bribed executioners for corpse parts, and collected their own bodily secretions in pursuit of love. Medieval dating involved actual grave robbing. The human ingredients required careful sourcing and preparation. Children's bone marrow was considered most potent, especially from children who died before baptism. Women would bribe gravediggers or sneak into cemeteries themselves to harvest fresh bones. The marrow had to be extracted within 3 days of burial using heated needles. It would then be dried, ground, and mixed with honey and wine. The resulting potion would be slipped into a target's drink over several weeks. Menstrual blood collection required planning and privacy. Women saved their monthly flow in special vessels, often ceramic pots marked with symbols. The blood would be dried into cakes or mixed fresh into food and wine. Some recipes required blood from specific days of the cycle. Others demanded the blood be collected during certain moon phases. The most elaborate rituals involved mixing menstrual blood with other bodily fluids collected after intimacy, creating a potion from the mingled essences of both partners. Hair harvesting happened during or immediately after intimate encounters. Women would secretly collect their lovers' hair, saving them in lockets or sewn into clothing. The hair would later be burned with specific incenses, ground into powder, or woven into amulets. Some recipes required hair from both partners, braided together and worn against the skin. Others demanded the hair be collected without the man's knowledge, adding another layer of deception to intimate moments. Corpse organ preparation was a specialized skill. The organs had to come from someone who died violently. Executed criminals were preferred, suicide victims second best. The organs would be dried slowly over low heat, then ground with specific herbs like vervain and mandrake. The powder would be mixed into food over time, supposedly creating irresistible attraction. Executioners developed side businesses, selling organs to desperate women. The preparation rituals surrounding these ingredients were as elaborate as the components were disturbing. Midnight cemetery expeditions required specific timing: new moon for binding spells, full moon for attraction magic. Women would recite incantations while harvesting materials, often elaborate Latin phrases they didn't understand. The mixing had to happen at crossroads or in churchyards. Some recipes required the woman to be unclothed, others demanded she wear her target's clothing. Full moon timing was considered essential for most love magic. Grimoires provided detailed astronomical charts showing optimal collection and preparation times. Ingredients gathered under the wrong moon phase were considered useless or even dangerous. Women would plan their activities months in advance, waiting for the perfect celestial alignment to create their potions. The incantations were a mixture of church Latin, folk charms, and pure nonsense. A typical example from a 14th century grimoire: per viscera mortui, per sanguinem menstruum, liga coramantis me. Women who couldn't read would memorize these phrases phonetically, often garbling them beyond recognition. The power was in the ritual, not the accuracy. Dosage calculations reveal surprising sophistication. Grimoires provided detailed instructions on how much potion to administer based on the target's size, temperament, and resistance level. Too little would be ineffective. Too much could cause madness or death. Women kept careful records of doses and effects, adjusting their recipes based on results. Some became known as love magic specialists, selling their services to other desperate women. The legal consequences for practicing love magic were severe but inconsistently enforced. The Church considered it a form of witchcraft, punishable by excommunication or death. Secular authorities treated it as poisoning if the target became ill, but enforcement depended entirely on social status and outcomes. Noble women caught using love potions might face penance. Poor women faced execution. Specific prosecutions reveal the widespread nature of the practice. In Montaillou, multiple women were tried for love magic between 1308 and 1325. Their testimonies provide detailed accounts of recipes and rituals. In Venice, a network of women selling love potions was exposed in 1480, revealing a sophisticated operation with standardized ingredients and prices. London court records show dozens of love magic cases annually throughout the medieval period. The punishments varied wildly based on circumstances. Women whose potions worked might face lighter sentences than those whose targets became ill or died. Noble women could often commute death sentences to exile or convent imprisonment. Poor women had no such options. The most creative punishment came from Augsburg, where convicted love potion makers were forced to publicly consume their own concoctions. Success rate claims in grimoires were obviously exaggerated, but testimonies suggest some psychological effectiveness. Men who knew they'd been targeted with love magic often reported feeling attracted against their will. The placebo effect, combined with the power of suggestion, created real behavioral changes. Some successful cases might simply have been coincidence. The target was already interested, and the potion provided confidence to act. Victim testimonies from court records provide insight into the effects. Men reported feeling unnaturally drawn to women they previously ignored. They described physical symptoms, racing hearts, inability to concentrate, inappropriate arousal. Whether from actual poisoning, psychological suggestion, or the nocebo effect, targets experienced real distress. The desperation driving women to these extremes reflects the brutal realities of medieval marriage markets. Women had limited options for economic security outside marriage. An unmarried woman past her prime faced poverty and social exile. Widow remarriage was often the only alternative to destitution. In this context, grave robbing for love potion ingredients seems less insane than pragmatic. The economic motivations went beyond simple survival. Marriage to a wealthy merchant or minor noble could transform a woman's entire family's fortunes. The difference between marrying a successful craftsman versus a laborer meant the difference between comfort and starvation. Love potions were investments in economic futures, worth the risk of execution. Classical tradition influenced medieval love magic significantly. Ovid's Art of Love described various potions and spells. Greek magical texts provided templates that medieval grimoire writers copied and adapted. The connection to classical authority gave love magic a veneer of respectability. If ancient poets wrote about it, how sinful could it be? Folk medicine and love magic overlapped considerably. Many ingredients in love potions had legitimate medicinal uses. Dove's blood was used to treat epilepsy. Human bone marrow appeared in remedies for joint pain. This overlap allowed women to obtain ingredients under medical pretenses. An apothecary selling dove brains for headaches couldn't know they'd end up in love potions. The gender dynamics of love potion use are telling. While both men and women used love magic, prosecutions overwhelmingly targeted women. Male practitioners were often classified as learned magicians rather than witches. Women's love magic was seen as more threatening because it subverted natural male authority. A woman controlling a man through magic inverted the proper social order. Church positions on love magic were complex and contradictory. While officially condemning all magic, some clergy provided love charms and blessings. Priests sold blessed candles and holy water for use in love rituals. Some monasteries had reputations for effective love magic. The Church's condemnation focused more on the diabolical aspects than the practice itself. This makes dating apps look absolutely miraculous by comparison. Modern romance might be complicated, but at least it doesn't require exhuming corpses. We've replaced magic potions with profile pictures and pickup lines. The worst that happens with online dating is ghosting, not actual poisoning. The extreme measures medieval women took for love reveal both the desperation of their circumstances and the universal human need for connection. But the most public humiliation was reserved for adulterers. Think public shaming on social media is bad? Medieval adulterers were paraded naked through town, with the woman holding a rope attached to her lover's waist. In southern France they called it la course, the run. When adulterers were caught, the community didn't just gossip or shun them. They organized a ritualized public humiliation that makes modern cancel culture look like a polite disagreement. The guilty couple would be stripped naked in the town square. A rope or leather cord would be tied around the man's waist, with the woman forced to hold the other end like a leash. Then they'd run through a prescribed route through town, while citizens lined the streets with whips, rotten vegetables, and chamber pots full of waste. Medieval cancel culture involved actual whips and very literal control over your partner. The ritual process began at dawn with church bells summoning the town. This wasn't mob justice. It was organized community punishment with established procedures. Town criers would announce the adultery, naming both parties and often providing details about how they were discovered. The guilty pair would be brought to the main square where officials would supervise their public undressing. The crowd would already be gathering with their instruments of punishment. The route planning followed traditional paths through the most populated areas. Starting at the main square, the couple would be forced to run past the church, through the market, around the well where women gathered, past the taverns where men drank. Each neighborhood had designated punishment stations where the strongest citizens would deliver measured blows. The route typically covered 2 to 3 miles and took hours to complete, as the couple was forced to stop for special humiliations at significant locations. Crowd gathering was a community event. Merchants closed shops, workers abandoned fields. Children were brought to witness the wages of sin. People prepared for days, saving rotten produce, collecting animal waste, preparing special whips. The anticipation built like a modern sporting event. Vendors sold food and drinks to spectators. Musicians sometimes provided drumbeat accompaniment to the run. Church bells rang continuously during the punishment, adding religious weight to civil justice. Different bell patterns indicated the progress of the run, rapid ringing when it began, slow tolling at punishment stations, triumphant peals when completed. The sonic landscape ensured everyone in earshot knew adultery was being punished. Some parishes rang specific adultery bells, used only for this purpose. The documented cases from Carcassonne's 1347 judicial records provide disturbing detail. A merchant's wife caught with a young clerk faced la course in July. The records note she was forced to pull him 3 miles while enduring strikes from willow branches and filth from the crowd. She survived but left town immediately after. He wasn't so lucky. The waist binding caused severe damage, and he died from infection within a week. Toulouse records from 1389 describe a knight caught with a baker's wife. Despite his noble status, he wasn't exempt from la course. The social inversion of a common woman leading a noble by a rope added extra humiliation. The crowd was especially vicious, seeing opportunity to punish social superiority. He survived, but was so damaged he couldn't ride a horse again, ending his military career. The survival rates were surprisingly low considering this was punishment, not execution. Between 30 to 40% of men died from infection or damage caused by the waist binding. Women faced better odds but still suffered severe injuries from whipping and crowd violence. Some couples attempted suicide rather than face la course. Others fled town when adultery accusations surfaced, becoming permanent exiles. Crowd participation levels revealed community dynamics. The most vicious attacks came from those closest to the wronged spouse. Family members were expected to deliver the harshest blows. But anyone with a grudge could use la course for revenge. Business rivals, rejected suitors, anyone who felt wronged could claim moral authority to inflict damage. The ritual became a pressure release for all community tensions. The community justice philosophy behind la course reflected medieval understanding of sin as communal pollution. Adultery didn't just wrong the spouse, it disrupted economic arrangements, questioned paternity, and challenged social order. The community had to physically purge the sin through collective action. Everyone who struck a blow was helping restore balance. The humiliation served as both punishment and cleansing ritual. Gender dynamics in punishment revealed medieval double standards. While both parties suffered, the symbolism differed. The woman holding the rope showed her unnatural dominance over men through sexuality. The man being led demonstrated how lust reduced men to animals. But women faced additional consequences. Most were expelled from town after la course, while men might be allowed to stay if they survived. Economic disruption emphasis explained the harsh punishment. Adultery threatened inheritance, disrupted business partnerships, and confused bloodlines. In a world where economic and family life were inseparable, adultery was theft of the highest order. The public nature of punishment restored confidence in social contracts. Everyone saw the consequences of breaking marriage vows. Comparison to other regions shows the Mediterranean particularly favoured rope-focused punishments. In England, adulterers more commonly faced the pillory or stocks. German towns preferred head shaving and tar. But southern France and parts of Italy made rope binding central to adultery punishment. Some historians link this to Roman law traditions that emphasized physical humiliation. The effectiveness as deterrent is debatable. Court records show adultery rates remained consistent despite harsh punishments. But la course served other functions: community bonding through shared violence, release of social tensions, reinforcement of marriage norms. The ritual's persistence suggests communities found it useful beyond simple deterrence. Evolution to less violent shaming happened gradually. By the 1500s, many towns replaced physical running with symbolic processions. Adulterers might be paraded on donkeys facing backward, or forced to wear signs detailing their crimes. The rope binding disappeared first. Too many deaths created legal problems. But public humiliation for adultery continued into the modern era in various forms. Twitter mobs seem positively gentle compared to la course. Online shaming might destroy reputations and careers, but it doesn't involve literal rope torture. We've replaced whips with hashtags, excrement with angry tweets. The impulse to publicly punish transgressions remains, but we've mostly eliminated the physical violence. Though the psychological damage of modern public shaming can last just as long as medieval scars. After witnessing the nightmare of fitness trials where judges examined men's capabilities in court, the horror of ceremonial verification where nobles watched newlyweds consummate, the hypocrisy of bishops running massive entertainment empires,